Welcome everybody. I'm so sorry we're not doing this in real life and we're just doing it virtually, but I'm absolutely honoured and thrilled to have such a wonderful panel here, and they've all got completely different experience, so it's going to be really interesting to hear their points on motherhood and how we make it work, or how we kind of sellotape the cracks and get on with it. We've got Victoria Newton, editor of The Sun, Anna Cook, Senior Communications Manager at Mumsnet and a former features director at Women and Women's Own. We've got Katherine Nash, who's recently returned to work as a super duper presenter and reporter at Channel 5 News. And joining us in a bit, we'll have Charlene White, the presenter for Loose Women and ITV News. I thought at first, oh, and here she is, as if by magic. Hi, Charlene. Thanks for joining us. I'm sure she'll fill us in with a brilliant story later on about what's been going on with her, which sort of sums everything up, but we'll come to you in a bit when you've caught your breath. I think we'll just kick off, really. I suppose for me anyway, when I had my two children, it started with pregnancy, which you can be pregnant, you've worked your whole life for this career, you've worked your socks off, you've got to a really good position, there's so much more ahead of you you want to achieve, and you're worried it's all going to fall away by the wayside as soon as you take some time out from work. So I just wanted to come first to Katherine Nash. You've just recently returned to work just a month ago after having your first child in lockdown last year. I mean, did you have those fears in pregnancy, and were they well founded, or how's it been for you?
I did have those fears, very much so. And I think the whole pandemic made it worse, because my last 2 weeks of work before starting maternity leave, I ended up having to work from home because nobody quite knew how coronavirus was going to affect pregnant women, and there was a lot of kind of anxiety surrounding that. So my boss just said, look, just work from home and do some reporting from home. So I didn't ever get to have those chats face to face with people. So I didn't get to say goodbye to anyone properly. I did it over Zoom. I didn't get to have a chat with my boss face to face. It was all on the phone. So there was quite a lot of anxiety surrounding that. And then on top of that, I was actually on short-term contracts, and my contract was nearing the end just as I was going on maternity leave. So it was an anxious time, obviously being pregnant, the pandemic, and worrying about work, and would everyone remember all the good bits of journalism that I'd brought in over the last couple of months. But actually, in reality, when I was off, I didn't think about it too much to start with.
Probably didn't have much time to think about it, I suppose.
Didn't have any time to think about it. My baby arrived a little bit early as well. So she kind of arrived on the end of my second week of maternity leave. And, actually, it's a weird thing. I'd worried about it. And then once I was on maternity leave and the baby had arrived, I kind of didn't think about it as much, because you've then got this new job, being a mum and getting your head around all of that. And also, my contract was extended, so that built confidence in me. And I was actually offered a staff position a month before I started back. So things did work out in the end. But I would say there was a bit of anxiety to start with, which I think is probably only a natural thing.
I think that's you raise a good point about the pandemic as well. I think that's something that everybody struggled with. I remember there was a brilliant tweet from Anna during the lockdown. She had manufactured a makeshift studio at home and was just about to broadcast live to BBC Breakfast when her little one climbed onto her lap. And how was that for you, Anna? How have you managed to make it work in lockdown?
Definitely been really tricky, and I didn't want to become a meme. I did not want my child running in the middle of the shot. But I think
it could still happen, by the way.
I could. My husband's got them glued to the computers and tablets, which is a great parenting strategy if you need one. But I think that the pandemic has made a lot of employers a lot more understanding. If you're able to work from home, they have to understand you have children. So it's become much more normalized. Any kind of caring has. And I think that a lot of employers made out it was impossible to work from home, but actually it isn't. And if you can cut down on that commute, you can maybe make a few more bedtimes. It's definitely made it easier for me with my children.
I think that's an interesting point, isn't it? That kind of presenteeism, which is so key in the media, I guess, or certainly has been historically. And I guess from having kind of women in leadership positions, that's can only be a positive thing. I mean, Victoria, I look to you because you're the editor of The Sun. So presumably if you've got an emergency you know, the buck stops with you and you can head home. You don't need to kind of worry about asking somebody ahead of you or above you. I mean, how important do you think that is in terms of having women at the top that can arrange these things?
I think it's extremely important. I mean, I used to, when I just had my baby, I was editing The Sun on Sunday then, which gave me more freedom because obviously I was the boss, but I would still sometimes fib about what I was doing if I was going to leave early to go and try and do a bedtime, whereas I wouldn't do that now. I've learned that now that I'm in the senior position I'm in, I'm really honest about if I'm going to go to the school play or I really want to go and see my son play football, because I never get to pick him up from school and I still hardly ever do that. But I'm really honest about it because I think that makes it easier for other women. Also, one of the key things I've tried to do is promote a lot more senior women. So we now have a female managing editor. The Scottish editor of The Sun is female. We have a female general manager. I have 2 women on the editing rota. Some of them are mothers, some do 4-day weeks, and it's become the norm that people can do flexible work or work from home if they need to. And as you say, the pandemic has made a real difference with that. And I should also point out that it's allowed a lot of men who are parents to go and pick up their kids, because that's a really important part of helping women get on too, is that men can feel part of their work being a great part being parent, that they're freed up. It makes it easier for women. So I hope that we've culturally changed that a fair bit on The Sun.
I think people might look to you in your position and think, oh, well, it's all right for her, she's already at the top, and you know, she's probably on a very good salary, she can afford all sorts of childcare. But I suppose it doesn't matter how good the systems you have in place are, your childcare might be great, they're just sometimes, and no matter how good the childcare is, you just want to be there. Maybe they're poorly.
You do. I mean, gosh, I mean, and certainly when I don't know how others found it, but when I first came back from maternity leave, and I probably came back too early for lots of reasons that you were all.
How long did you take?
6 months. And the reason I probably came back too early was there was a new editor within 3 weeks of me about to go off on maternity leave, about to have the baby. I had a new editor, a new CEO. The Brexit vote was coming up, the Euros were about to happen, and I felt my own internal pressure. Oh my God, I've got to get back, and otherwise all my hard work, as you say, will be gone to waste. So to come back to the next point, is I remember coming back from maternity leave, and for that first year, you are just desperate to get out the door and see your baby. There's like a visceral sort of need to do that. And yes, I was senior enough to be able to make those decisions, but I had an amazing deputy that was so supportive. But my goodness, did I not always think, they're all going to think I'm skiving, this is, you know, it's going to be a disaster for my career. But I do think those attitudes have changed. When I think sort of even say, I don't know, 10 years ago, there was definitely a culture in the media of people saying, oh, there she goes, skiving at 5. I just don't think that would happen now. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I do think things have changed.
I can see you nodding away, Charlene, and this might be kind of ringing true for you a little bit. That you can be very organized, you can have your childcare planned, and with little kids, there's, you know, a swerve ball can get thrown at you at any minute.
Yeah, which is exactly what happened today, as you know. So I had a meeting this morning, and in the middle of the meeting, it wasn't in our building, but in the middle of the meeting, I get a phone call from Nursery. And as anyone who has toddler children will know, when that flashes up on the phone, it's like, oh God, what now? So I answered the phone in the middle of the meeting and apologized, answered the phone, and essentially he's got some spots on his face, so like, we think he's got chicken pox, he's got to come home. And I was off work yesterday with him because it was my turn to sort of take some time off if one of them was sick. But today we assumed they'd both be fine, so my other half had packed his day full of meetings, and really I was really the only person that could, you know, take the time out and go and pick him up. So I was due to start work at 2, and at 5 to 2 I'm calling my boss and saying, I'm so sorry, but I can't come into work today. I'm really, really sorry. And I think what Victoria says is true. If you have someone, so my boss on ITV News London is a mum, the boss of ITV News, also a parent, she's also a mum. So there is that level of understanding, and they know that I am not calling in sick for no reason whatsoever. They know if I'm doing doing it, it's for good reason. And I think Victoria's right, 10 years ago, there may well have been that sort of eye roll and, oh gosh, she's off again. But I feel really lucky to have had my kids at a period of time where there is that level of understanding for both men and women, I think, in our newsroom, because we are very honest about parenting, and we all are suddenly being treated like grown-ups, where it's like we're not doing it on purpose, we really have no choice. But if we can continue to do the work whilst looking after a sick child at home, we really will. And if we can't, we can't. And I think, you know, for it to happen, for me to have kids now, I do feel lucky, because I know not every one of the presenters that work in TV news as parents, but especially as mums, has had that experience historically.
And there's I mean, there's still quite a lot to be done, isn't there? I think there's still some progress to be made. Anna, you took quite a different tack, I think, after having your second child. Am I right in saying that you took a different kind of route with your career, which has been quite interesting for you?
Yeah, I always really identified with my career. My career was my entire life, and I couldn't imagine anything else. So when I got pregnant the first time, I had the same anxieties that Katherine was talking about going back and what will it be like. And that was stressful enough. But the second time round, I was working for Time Inc. and they underwent a major restructure. So when my baby was 10 weeks old, I ended up taking voluntary redundancy. And that's something I would never have considered before having children. I would have fought, you know, clinging on. They'd have had to push me out the door before. But it came at the right sort of time for me. It meant that I had my maternity leave to think about what to do next. And it gave me some freedom. So, and in many ways, it gave me more time with both children. It also meant I didn't have to put both in nursery, which would have been crippling cost-wise. So I had a little bit of thinking time. And then that, I wasn't intending to go back to even a job. I was intending to freelance full-time or part-time-ish. And then I saw a job for Mumsnet came up. And I felt like I had been revising for it for my whole maternity leave. I had been on Mumsnet most of the time. So it seemed to work out quite well. And yes, I ended up going down more of the PR comms side of things, doing the BBC Breakfast and different appearances, and actually in a job where having children is an asset, is a huge asset. I'm able to talk about C-sections on TV with experience of that. I'm able to inform the surveys that we do and the stories, and realize that a lot of my son's contemporaries are trying to get full-time nursery now because grandparents can't look after them after the pandemic. So that becomes a story.
You make a really good point there, and it's one that we were just discussing just before in the green room, that rather than seeing it as a disadvantage, which kind of all the fears that kind of fill your mind when you're pregnant and all the emotions going around, it's actually, I mean, certainly my experience, I've written stories about, you know, that I would never have got if I wasn't plugged into the world that the kids are in. And I guess it puts you more in touch with your audience or your readership. I mean, is that something that you've experienced, Victoria?
Massively so, yeah. I mean, it's the single most important thing to happen in my life is obviously becoming a mother, and it completely changes your view of stories and parents and the types of issues that you cover in your paper. I definitely think it makes you think through a different lens, for sure. So it's adding value.
I don't know, my experience, it sort of made me braver, I suppose. There's something else other than this career that you've been kind of gunning for and you've worked so hard for, but that, you know, you're braver to make decisions because there's something else that matters more, basically.
Well, it's interesting, Kate, because I look at it as in a similar way but slightly differently. Yeah. I've realised that by squeezing out 2 children, that's the most difficult thing to do. To birth these people for 9 months, keep them alive, have that stress every day, and we're trying to figure out, are they still moving or not? If you can do all of that, go through hours of labour, my God, I can do my job with my eyes closed. Do you know what I mean?
You can do anything.
Yeah. I think I went back to work after number 1, just sort of thinking, God, I can't believe I just did that. And actually anything is possible because I can do it. You know, it can be the most scariest thing in the world for some women giving birth. And the whole idea of having to squeeze that head out of you can just seem like the most stressful thing in the entire world. And when you've done it, be squeezing it out or having a C-section, whatever, once you've done it, you realize you can do anything. And I think I went back to work with that in my head, and then had number 2. And I was like, I'm not being funny, if I can juggle these 2 kids, then I can really, really do anything. And I think that's where my brain was at. And I took 8 months, and I knew I was only going to take 8 months with both of them, because it wasn't feeding my brain enough to be at home for any longer than that.
And it's okay to say that, you know.
Yeah, I'm in no way, shape or form embarrassed about that in any way. I think I'm a far nicer person and a far better mum when I'm not with them 24/7, because my brain needs to be doing lots of other things. And I'm not ashamed in any way, shape or form to say that. I think the level of work that I do shows that. But I am with my kids as much as I can be when I'm not doing any of that stuff. And I love spending time with them. I just don't want to do that all the time.
And you're not grumpy mum when you're with them because you feel fulfilled in your career as well. And I think that's interesting. I do think the debate's changing, even in the last 10 years, that it's okay to say that and it's okay to want something else. It used to be about having it all, but we don't talk about that anymore, because we know that that's not, well, certainly I know that that's not possible. It's about making the decisions as they come up at the right time for the right reasons, or maybe just kind of struggling through and seeing what works best at the time for you. But it's interesting how that debate has changed, Charlene. I think that's a really interesting point about making, you know, being honest with other moms.
Yeah, the way that, you know, if you like your job and you're a parent, the way that we have been portrayed in films and in sitcoms or what have you is like we're the most terrible people in the world and we can't handle it. And then at the end of the day, we sort of crumble, and it's like, you know, it's the worst thing in the world to try and balance both. But I think when you have people honestly talking about, yes, it's not easy at all. Of course, it's not easy. You know, there are days where you're absolutely knackered when they've not slept, as mine hasn't done all weekend because he's not been well, and then have to get up and go to work yesterday morning. It's like, well, I enjoy this and I will do this, and yeah, it's not easy at all, but neither option is easy, and that's the point, isn't it? It's just whichever option works for you.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that you can have it all. I think there's always something that's got to give, and you will always feel a bit of guilt or just extreme tiredness and feel like you're never doing either thing particularly well. I still feel that all the time, and I definitely haven't got the life-work balance right. It's good, but you know, it's there's a lot of things you sacrifice too, and it's just about trying to juggle those things at the right moments, isn't it? And making that work. But I wouldn't want anyone to think that there's a perfect solution, because there really isn't. And in many ways, sometimes I'm not sure even if the richer you are, whether that makes that much of a difference, because you still want to be there and be the parent and do all those things rather than having someone else do it. So,
and in terms of practical, the practical nitty-gritty of just arranging for somebody else to look after your child and things, especially if you've got a job where you're on the road, Katherine, like yours, how do you make that? Practically, how do you make that work when you have a job where someone could ring up at any moment and say, Katherine, we need you in Glasgow, you know, in 2 hours or whatever, you know, in a few hours time? How are you doing that?
Well, my little girl's in nursery a couple of days a week, and my parents don't live too far away, so they are helping out as well. But I would say it's down to my husband, really. I need to give him a lot of credit because he does all the heavy lifting. She's not a sleeper, so we're up at night probably 2 or 3 times for periods of time still, which has been tough. But he knows that I've got to get in the car and potentially drive hundreds of miles away from home, and you know, he's been getting up with her. He gives her breakfast, he takes her to nursery and picks her up from nursery. Again, that's something that he can only do because he's working from home and can manage his timetable. You know, really, he should be on a train, you know, into London and back again. But because he's working from home, he's able to help out. So for me, it's having that kind of support system around me that's enabled me to go back to work and enabled me not to feel guilty about enjoying my job, because I know that my daughter's well looked after. She's either with her grandparents or at nursery, which she seems to enjoy, or with my husband. So I feel incredibly lucky actually to have, you know, all of those people on my team, if you like, which means that I can work. I know that there'll be a time when I probably have to say no to something, which I never used to do. You know, I used to just be able to, as you say, you know, get on a train and get up to Scotland or wherever I was needed. And I know there'll be a point when I'm asked to do something and I'll have to say no, you know, because I've got a baby. But at the moment, we've only been doing it for a month. You know, we are managing to muddle through and juggle through. It'll be interesting to see how it all pans out when my husband does have to go back into the office, which I think he will do, probably not full time, probably partly working from home and partly back in an office. But it will be interesting to kind of see how it all pans out then. But I'd say the support system is key, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Katherine is absolutely right. And I think it's really important to remember that mum isn't the default parent, and someone needs to tell my child's nursery and school this, that whenever one of them is sick, they call me. And I was the one who was working out of the home. My husband works for ITV, which is incredibly family friendly. And when we went back after the first one was born, he would work what we call the dad shift. He would do 7 till 4 and then pick him up from nursery. I would do 10 until the magazine went to press. So that meant that we both fulfilled our obligations, and it worked well. And if you're lucky enough to be in a 2-parent relationship, it shouldn't be him helping you out. You know, he should absolutely have equal responsibility if you're both working the same number of hours. And like, he had to join the mum's WhatsApp group. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's a WhatsApp group. He needs to know when my child needs to dress as a Roman centurion just as much as I do.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point about partnerships there as well. And I think one of the best pieces of advice to me when, you know, I was going through a really dark time and came back to work to a new job at the Mail on Sunday after my first baby, and I'd been off for 6 months and came back into this full-time, really full-on job. And there were a couple of moments when I just thought, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to walk away. I'll go freelance, which at the time seemed like this was going to be this panacea that would solve everything. And I had a great piece of advice from a friend of mine who said, it's hardly worth it anyway, you know, the amount we're paying in childcare. But she said, you mustn't detract or subtract the amount you're paying in childcare from your salary, because it's not your responsibility if you're in a partnership. And I hadn't really thought of it like that, stupidly, but that was a really good piece of advice. I'm getting some really good questions actually on the chat, and I'm just going to throw one of them out there. I mean, we've had some really empowering things about how, you know, it's boosted our confidence when we've had children. There's somebody here who says, I feel like I've coasted a bit as a freelancer between having my children and actually lost a bit of confidence. I'm only just clawing this back now and wondered if anyone has any experience of this or any advice.
Well, Katherine, you were freelancing whilst you were off, weren't you? You were freelance when you went on to maternity leave, weren't you?
Yeah, well, I was on kind of 6 monthly contracts, which, yes, were kind of coming up for renewal. My baby was born, and then a month later I knew that I would be out of contract, and even though I physically wasn't going back to work a month after my baby was born, I still wanted to have that security and know that I was part of a team. So, I mean, the best advice I can give, it's communication, isn't it? It's keeping those channels of communication with, you know, employers open, which isn't always easy when you're raising children and you're physically away from the office. But for me, it was kind of keeping up that conversation with work whilst I was off, and reminding them that, you know, my contract was coming near and, you know, to an end. Okay, I wasn't in work because I was on maternity leave, but, you know, I still very much wanted to be part of that team. So I'd say for me, it was kind of keeping that conversation going, which is tough when you're trying to juggle 1,000,001 things at home.
And I also think it's also remembering just how good you are. And I think it's really easy historically for people to make you feel as though you're less than because you've had kids and you've been out of the game for a few months or a few years. And I think it's really important to remember that you do the job you do for a reason, because you have the skills to do it, the creativity and the ability. And just because you've had children, that doesn't mean those things have suddenly disappeared. They've probably been strengthened because all of a sudden you're juggling much more than yourself in your life. And I think that it's really easy for people to make you feel as though you're just not up to it anymore. And I just, as Victoria says, that just doesn't run anymore in this day and age. I think we all just have to remember that we are as good as we were when we left to have children, and may well be even better. And if we don't lose that within ourselves, then the way in which we approach work and approach people, I think that the confidence will shine. A lot of it is about confidence, isn't it? And as long as you've still got that, I think that's key in everything. And also, I think if more men took up the paternity leave options which are available, that would also change the way that we feel about ourselves when we're returning to work as well.
Yeah,
confidence has been a massive thing that I've noticed, both in this job and in my previous job, that like we were talking earlier about how terrified you are when you're pregnant about what's going to happen afterwards. Are you going to be able to cope? And I've had women who've asked to take demotions before they've even had the baby because they think they won't be able to cope when they come back. Or they come back and you struggle to cope at first, especially once you put your child in childcare and they get every illness known to man and you get really sick, don't you? I mean, I think I had a year of colds and nothing prepares you for that. They don't tell you that's what's going to happen. So you get women who come back, I just can't do the job I was doing, I can't cope, and very quickly they ask for a demotion. And I see it as our job as leaders to try and talk them out of that, hopefully, because long term it does get better. Although equally I could also give other examples of women who came back to the job they were doing before full-time 5 days a week, and after sort of 3 or 4 months just can't cope with this. I'd like to do a 3-day week, or I want to do a 4-day week, otherwise I'm going to leave. And you make sure that they don't leave and that you help them with flexible working. And I think that has become a lot easier now than it used to be.
I got to a point where I walked into the editor and just said, I can't do this anymore. I want to do 4 days a week. And immediately he just said, yeah. And I was prepared, I had all my reasons. And it was a former editor. It's not my, I had all my reasons. I was prepared. I'd build up my confidence. I've been thinking about it for a couple of weeks. I went in there, prepared to make my case, and he just went, yeah. And I've gone back to 5 days a week now. And I was so glad for that breathing space. And thank goodness that I took it and, had that, it was either that or kind of walk out. But
it's important to talk to people about that, because there's nothing wrong with talking to other parents in the room within your newsrooms. And when I came back from number 1 from Alfie, I went back 3.5 days a week is what I was doing, because someone advised me actually just to be able to get into the groove of things and get used to being back, maybe do that and see how that went. And then when I came back from having number 2, I went up to 4 days a week, because I knew what the realities of parenting was by that point. So actually going into doing 4 days a week works really well for me. But it was having a conversation with one of the makeup artists at work, and I was like, I think I'll do Monday to Thursday and then be off Friday, Saturday, Sunday. She went, no, don't do that. Take the Wednesday off so you can have a breather. Take that Wednesday off. So if everything seems like it's getting on top of you by Tuesday, Wednesday, you've got a breather, go back to it on Thursday. And that was the best advice that anyone ever gave me, because actually I can handle my week far, far better knowing that I've got that break in the middle with these two.
And do you stick to that? Because often I suppose the danger with working 4 days a week, I found, is that you end up doing 5 days a week anyway, or you end up, filling in the gaps.
You say that, I'm working tomorrow. But it doesn't happen that often. I'm very mindful of not doing that very often at all. And much like Katherine, I'm very lucky that my other half is working from home. So there are ways in which we can juggle things. And I'm so lucky because he took the full 5 months paternity. And I'm sort of like one of those people that shouts the rooftops, get your partner to take the paternity. And at his employer, they offer 5 months full pay. And I was a bit like, when in your entire career will your employer offer you this money for not coming into work? We'd be stupid not to accept that. And so him being here for those 5 months, which then went into the pandemic. So when everyone else was sort of yelling at each other by like month 2 of the pandemic, we'd already been through that because we've been together for months beforehand. It just made life so much easier. And it means things like me sort of saying, okay, well, I'm now working the Wednesday. You'll have to do pick up and drop off and pick up and what have you. None of that phases in any shape or form, because he had that period with us. He knows the routine, and we co-parent. They have 2 parents. I'm not taking everything on myself.
I would say it's about reframing it as not coasting. It's what you need in that moment. So after my redundancy, I needed the 3 days. I needed that time. And now they're a little bit older. I'm able to take on more, and I'm able to do more, more exciting roles. I'm able to do extra training. I'm able to do more TV appearances. So I think it's about realizing that's what you need in that moment. So I wouldn't say to the person who asked the question that they're necessarily coasting. It was just what you needed to do when you had a very tiny baby who maybe didn't sleep. And now look at the other opportunities that are out there.
And let's be kind.
I couldn't have done my current job. I couldn't have done when I first had the baby. No way. I was lucky that I was doing the Sunday paper role, where you have one day of the week where you're working 13 hours, and the other days you can leave much earlier. I literally couldn't have done that in this job.
I think we need to be kind to ourselves as well. And, it feels a lot of kind of personal judgment in that question, doesn't it? Oh, I'm coasting, what's going on? But, it's okay, you're staying in the game. And I think there's something to be said for just, even if you go down to 2 days a week, you know, staying in the game and staying in some sort of experience or keeping in touch with people, because I expect it's harder once you come out to come back in. Katherine, I've got one here. Somebody's saying any tips for going, this makes me a little bit sad. Somebody's saying any tips for going back, for returning to work, but her first baby's due in just a few days, so she's already thinking about returning to work. Bless her.
First tip, don't think about it.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. Easier said than done. I would say just, you know, if you enjoy your maternity leave, because the one thing that I was so surprised about is how quickly the time went. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's almost in the blink of an eye, isn't it? You know, you kind of worry about it, and then suddenly the baby's here, and then suddenly they're one, and you're thinking, you know, about what you want to do next, or you know, going back to work, and so I would say just enjoy it all. And then for me, I think the things that made me feel a bit more secure was finding a nursery that we liked, having a bit of a plan in place of perhaps, you know, when I would go back, having a chat with work about, you know, what month that would be, and then just putting in place all those little things that make you feel a bit more secure. So my daughter, for instance, she goes to my parents one day a week. We started that, I think, back in January, and I didn't start back until April. So I had a baby-free day. So I was getting used to, you know, not having my daughter around all the time. My parents were getting used to having her. She was getting used to being with them and without us. And all of that just made me feel a bit more secure about starting back. And then when the time came to start back, was obviously nervous. But within a day, I thought, blimey, it feels like I've not been off a year. And it's that bizarre thing. It's just deeply ingrained in you, you know, what you do. I was worried about writing scripts, and I had to do a live or interviewing people. And actually within kind of 5 minutes of being back at work, it was almost like I'd never left. So I just wouldn't worry about it until you get to the point where, you know, you're needing to worry about it.
Somebody's messaged in with some good advice here as well. I said, this is going back to the one about feeling that you're coasting. My advice is just to start slowly, which is similar to what you're saying, Katherine, getting used to the childcare arrangements. At first, you may not be as sharp as you used to be with all the sleep deprivation, but be kind to yourself if your baby brain doesn't function as it used to. Take it one article at a time, which I think is really good advice.
I think that is good. That is good advice, because I think we do all put an awful lot of pressure on ourselves. And you know, we shouldn't, because Charlene's right in what she was saying. You know, lots of us have probably been doing our jobs for a while before we go off on maternity leave, and it is second nature. And, you know, we just need to perhaps believe a bit more in ourselves that we can do it. And I know I wish I'd kind of believed in myself a bit more in the run up to starting back, because once I started back, as I said, it felt like I'd never left.
Absolutely. I mean, is there a piece of advice, Victoria, that you had at the time that really helped you, or perhaps something that you know now that you wish you'd known then?
Probably loads. Oh, you mean about starting back in particular? In particular,
or just kind of getting through those. It's those early days, isn't it, that are the worst? I mean, I had my first, and I took 6 months off, and my husband took paternity leave, which was a godsend. The second one, I was much more relaxed about going back to the job, and I had a year off. So it's sort of, you know, at the time how it fits at the time, I suppose. But it was those early days with the first child.
Yeah, it does get better though, and it does get easier as they get a little bit older. So if you're really struggling in that first year that you're back, or even first 2 years, when mine didn't sleep until he was 3 through the night, and even then, you know, it's still exhausting. But it does get better, and it does get a bit easier. And once they start going to school, it makes a real difference. And don't feel completely lost if you're really struggling in those first couple of years. And like you say, be kind to yourself, and don't try and be Superwoman, because nobody can be, or Superman.
You did incredibly well. You know, it's not just that you kind of carried on and clung on to the job. You know, you've been promoted. You know, you're the editor of The Sun. I mean, how did you do that? Frankly, I mean.
Well, I mean, it's all about the teams you've got around you. I had an incredibly supportive deputy on my Sunday paper role, an incredibly supportive CEO, and that really helped. I knew I had the confidence of her, And if I ever had a problem with anything to do with my child, I would, you know, go straight to her. It wouldn't be a problem. I didn't worry about showing my vulnerability in that way, was I think I probably would have done in the past. I think it probably helps having a female boss as well. But yeah, I think the presenteeism was another thing that you can we all became obsessed with, and we all used to have that. And I think I realized doing that Sunday paper job with a child, I gradually got more confident that I didn't have to sit there all hours to do it, because we're all on these constantly, me more than anybody. And there's so much that you can do once you've put the baby to bed and then you carry on working. So it's not feeling that you've got to sit there as well to prove yourself that that's the way it's done. And it used to be traditionally done like that, certainly in print newspapers, where the only influence you can have was late at night on the back bench. I think we've all realised now we can do things differently. And again, the pandemic's helped, showing us with shift work and working from home that there are different ways around problems. So just basically don't feel lost and that you have to do the job in the same way that you did it before.
Anna, I suppose with working for a digital organisation, then you can be as flexible as you like, I suppose, or does it work the opposite way around? Maybe it means that you're on call till midnight, because I suppose that's the downside of us all having, Zoom meetings and mobile phones.
I think that we're very good at setting boundaries. And what I did when I work 3 days, and in my email signature, I don't say I just work 3 days. I change it to say I work 3 days. It's a fact. It's not a just. I'm not apologizing for it. It's what I do. I work 3 days. This is when you can contact me. I do answer my phone. I do check in with work, but I try not to let it encroach in my time with the children, because I want to enjoy those days, like Charlene said, when you're with them and present, but also enjoy the days when they're at school and nursery and further away. I think being there is a danger of it kind of encroaching in, but also having understanding bosses, understanding teammates, and it's in the title for me, Mumsnet. It would be very bad business and PR if they weren't flexible, if they didn't understand when I got the call from nursery about chickenpox that I had to go. So that all definitely works in my favor, but I realize those are things that you can't necessarily control. But I guess what you can control is making sure you've got a good nursery. So when we did the tours, or childminder or nanny, for us it was nursery, because if the childminder was sick, that was it, childcare over. Nursery, they have more people there. So that worked really well. And when we were looking at nurseries, we were always told to make sure you look for the toys that are well played with and books that are read. If they're pristine, it means they're for Instagram only and the children don't get a look in. We also viewed one nursery, which we nicknamed the Death Trap Nursery, because it had a water table next to a plug socket, big stereo sound system with a hanging trailing cable at toddler height. And it looked like the opening scene of Casualty. We did not want to go there. So it was, once we found a nursery that we were really happy with, you could see the children were well cared for, you could see they were dirty because they were playing, then it felt much, much easier to leave them, have a nice long settling in session. We did that for 3 months, like Katherine said. It was really good. And then you can feel secure at leaving them and you feel like you can do a good job at work.
It's still tough though, isn't it? I remember those early days of kind of, the nursery would open at 7:30 and I'd be there at 7:31, kind of like shoving him in the door, thinking, oh God.
And also,
I'd done my homework. I'd picked, an expensive enough one. And, but it's still, you're on the train, floods of tears and you're smelling of sick because somehow you've got Weetabix on your skirt and I suppose it's just those awful kind of first days, but people don't talk about childcare that much either, I don't think. Charlene, how do you do it? I know your husband's brilliant. Do you have nurseries or nannies or?
Yeah, so the advice I sort of give, listen, because Victoria's sort of saying that her kid didn't sleep till 3, I would have gone absolutely mental. I think you're amazing. I knew I knew I wanted to go back at 8 months, first time around. So I started planning everything. That preparation of I need to make sure I'm in the right headspace in order to be able to go back at 8 months and be fine. So at 4.5, 5 months, I sleep trained him, because I knew that the nature of my job and the way that I can travel, and in order that I feel all right, if someone else has got to look after him, we've got to send him to family to be looked after, or if he's got to be here with his dad for a few days, I will feel better about it and I worry less if I know that he will just sleep. So I sleep trained him. I was very, very militant with it, and I sleep trained him, and he was sleeping through the night from about 5.5 months. And I did the same with Florence, so that I knew that by 8 months he'd be ready to be fine. So we do a combination of nursery, but it had to be a nursery that opened early enough so we could still get to work on time, and one that finished late enough that we would be able to at least leave work on time-ish and get there in time before it closes. And around here, where I live, there are quite a few nurseries that like close at 6 o'clock. It's like, who finishes work at 5 and is at a nursery by 6 o'clock? That's insane. So our sort of finishes at sort of 6:30, 7. So then we had that in place, but then we also had to make sure that we could do pickup. We did have grandparents with Alfie, but my mother-in-law is older now, so she can't really do the two of them together. So we've got a nanny that does pickup, and we just really lucked out with her. She's never let us down at all, but we had to change who did that about 2.5 months into me going back to work the second time. And the lady that we had used to work at his nursery, she thought she could handle it with a little baby. She couldn't, and she was really stressed, and it was really hard for her, and I completely understood that, but it did leave us with a massive gap and no one to look after our children. So I had family coming to help, and essentially the lady that we've got now, who's just wonderful, I met her once and then called her 2 days later. I was like, right, can you start tomorrow? You seem fine. I only like looking at my children, so take it away. And it turns out, and there was a part of me that did feel bad. There's also a part of me that's a bit like, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, the chances of her actually being able to disappear out of the country of my children are quite slim, so should be fine. And it turns out that it was fine, and that she was the best decision that we ever made. But there was that moment where it's just like, I need to concentrate at work, and I can't, because I'm having to work out who is going to pick up my children tomorrow, who's going to look after them tomorrow. And that was not nice. For the time, it was about 2.5, 3 weeks, and it's the height of me covering for other people at network ITV News. So it was really, really hard, but thankfully we haven't really had that huge a problem arise since. But as long as all those things are in place, I know that I can go to work, and 95% of the time it's all right, and that's why I can do my jobs.
I think that's it, isn't it? You have to have some sort of kind of stable childcare in place, and I think you got to just pay the money, and it's cripplingly expensive. But I think even if you're kind of breaking even, again, not subtracting your salary, the childcare from just your salary. Yeah, I mean, we did the same thing. We had nursery and grandparents for the first child, and not to put you off, Katherine, but I did find that grandparents' interest did kind of wane with the second one.
I've been warned.
One day a week free childcare seemed to disappear. So we made a tough decision and poached one of the nursery workers to be our kind of full-time nanny, which is, it sounds, oh well, that's all very well for you, sort of thing. But it was a huge kind of financial undertaking, and still is, but it gives me felt like it gave me a bit of sanity back. Meant that we made sacrifices elsewhere financially, but that was a kind of a godsend for me, and I think it's not an option for everybody.
And I think irrespective of how much you earn, it's really, really hard. And with my grandparents did all the pickup from school and all of that stuff. They did all of that. My parents worked 5 jobs between them, and my dad would finish his second job at 5:30 in the afternoon. No, he'd finish at 3, pick us up, go back out at 5:30. My mum would come back, he'd go out to work until 10 o'clock. So we all sort of try and find ways to do the things that we want to do and try and find childcare around them. And I think family will always come into play with that, and they will always for us be the emergency. But as you say, grandparents are great when it's one, but as they, we are having kids older. My grandparents weren't as old as my parents are now when we were younger, because my parents had me when they were in their 20s. Whereas, grandparents now are in their 70s. So it's difficult. But whatever your earning capacity is, you know, there should be more help available childcare wise, and until that happens, you know, we're all having to rely on things in different ways.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I was just going to say, do you think the gender pay gap, the advances that have been made in that area should be helping more women now? Because we stopped doing what you're saying, Anna, and compare it, taking the money away from our own salaries, or was it you that said it, Charlene? I can't remember, for the childcare, and thinking.
Oh, Kate did.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, that actually the gender pay improvements should, in theory, help.
Absolutely. Well, long may it continue. And I think there's still some work to be done there, isn't there, on all that. There's a really interesting question that's come up, actually. It's all very well when your kids are in school and then you've got the after school clubs, but has anybody got any tips on how to get through the school holidays? 6 weeks is a long time, and this person saying that just one day of childcare for her 3 children costs around £180, which is, I mean, cripplingly expensive. You really got to be earning a lot of money to make it worthwhile for.
I would love advice on that, because my kids start school in September. So if anyone's got any nuggets of
maybe people can
advice,
give some
I'd love
advice.
it.
I've got a 7-year-old.
Yeah,
The holiday clubs at the school can be cheaper. Also, whether it's nursery or childminders, don't forget to claim the tax-free childcare. The government make it almost impossible to do that form, and it crashes about 3 times every time you fill it in, and you have to pointlessly re-register every 3 months. But do it, because it's free money. And now my nursery bill has almost halved because of it, and soon it will, and in September I have one going to school too, Charlene, so counting the days to getting that money back.
I think it also depends on the employer. I'm not sure what you guys do over at the Sun Victoria, but I know at ITN we are becoming really family friendly. So as Katherine will know, so during August you are able to take the whole of August off. If you're a parent or if you're not a parent, you are allowed to take the whole of August off, and then you are paid for 11 months over the 12 months. And it is there for parents, so that, you know, if you're struggling with that childcare cost, what they are sort of saying is, okay, well, you can have those 4 weeks off. That's in addition to your holiday entitlement. And I think that there's a lot to be said for employers getting involved in that, and employers understanding it's not just our responsibility to keep forking out cash. If you want to have parents who are able to not have to keep struggling with this every single summer, help us out a bit. And my job for the last few years has been to cover for parents, those on our presenting team, to cover for them when they take that August off, so they can be with their kids and it cuts down on their childcare bill. And imagine if loads more companies provided that to parents. It would make life so, not all constantly easier, but make it slightly easier, especially on a cost level.
It's also in the company's interest, isn't it, I suppose, because the company is going to attract people that wouldn't necessarily have that. Sorry, Victoria, sorry.
No, exactly. I know we have been looking at that, and as we keep talking about the pandemic, but so many things are changing as a result of that, and I'm sure this was something we were looking at. I'll have to come back to you on where we've got to. But
I'd also recommend babysitting circles. So if you have other working parents who have children the same age and you work 3 days a week, have the children over on your day off. It's not off. Have your children off on that day, and then you can work the rest of the week, and then you can offload your school age child to them on another day for free.
Yeah, there is no time off.
my off days are easier than my work days.
There's one here as well. This might be one for Victoria. This person's loved being able to work from home for the past 18 months, but now the boss wants me to go back into the office 75% of my working week when the restrictions are lifted. And they've got a really long commute, 3 hours a day, really sad about, they've got used to being around for bedtime, now they're going to lose that. Is there any way of being able to kind of negotiate that? What would you say to that person?
I would think so. I mean, the way we're looking at that sort of thing now is which roles can realistically be done from home and which can't. There are some that definitely can, and the commute time has obviously changed some people's lives. There are some jobs that we feel need to be done in the office, and sometimes it might be that you do a job where sometimes you have to act up to do one that has to be done in the office, but the rest of the time you don't. So I don't think there's one solution that fits all, but we're certainly looking at making that sort of thing much easier for people. But like each role can be different.
And I suppose this goes back to what Charlene was saying, is having that confidence to go in and say, I'm just going to go and ask, Because I can only say no, I suppose.
Always ask.
Yeah.
In my experience, women are too timid to ask for things, and men are never as timid.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting. I'm sure we've all got experience of that. In terms of the kind of guilt factor, we sort of a little bit touched on that. But there's the kind of fear factor and guilt factor. Does that ever go away, Anna?
Well, when I applied for the Mumsnet role, in the advert it said never miss a school play or nativity thing unless you want to, which I thought was a brilliant advert. Because let's face it, sometimes it's not always that great. But yeah, I do still have guilt, and so sometimes there's a work thing you can't get out of. I missed a Mother's Day thing at my son's nursery, and I also was supposed to send him dressed as a tiger last week, and I forgot. I felt awful. He didn't notice, so I think it's that be kind to yourself, that cut yourself a bit of slack. It's not going to shape their future. He is not going to fail his A-levels because he wasn't dressed as a tiger last week.
And there's one comment, this is a really interesting one. Do you think there will be a career penalty for working from home once more people are back working in the office? Or do we think those days are gone? I mean, it used to be, the people who went down the pub got the promotion, the people who were hanging around on the back bench late on, on a Wednesday night or whatever would get the promotion. Do you think there will be a career penalty for people wanting to work from home?
I don't think so. No, I think, it depends which roles you do, and there are definitely some that can be done from home, and so I really wouldn't worry about that.
I suppose there's some jobs that just can't. I mean, Charlene, if you're on Loose Women, I mean, you can't, I suppose you can zoom in, but you just got to be there. You can.
No, but I can't.
Get your frock on, get your makeup done. And get in there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as host, I can't zoom in. The host doesn't zoom in, unfortunately. So not much has changed for me really during the pandemic. I mean, getting up and going to work 4 days a week. I can't do my job from home, so I have to go in. But what you were sort of saying about the guilt, it's interesting because Jane Moore from Loose, Jane and I have spoken about this before. Jane and I are very similar people in the way that we don't necessarily feel the guilt. So it's a bit like Jane and I think very like about this, they have both parents. Do both parents feel guilty about something, or does only a mother feel guilty about something, and why is that? So I tend not to. I know that if I'm not there, my kids are loved. They've got parents, they've got two parents, they've got family. Nursery is there, we've got a childcare system sort of set up. So if I can't, if I'm not able to be there, I'm not sort of, crying into the studio floor or anything like that. It's a bit like, well, he's fine. And a good example of that is when he stuck crayon up his nose at nursery when he was younger. And they called to say, and I was like, well, can he breathe? Like, well, yes. Well, he'll be fine until I get back. I can't, I've got my program at 6. I'll be back just after 7. And, as long as he doesn't snort it anywhere. I said, even if he snorts it all the way up there, it'll come through his throat, he'll be fine. So I sort of then came back and I came back home, and it was like, I think we're going to have to go to A&E. I was like, okay, brilliant. But we're going to have to wait for me to wipe my makeup off and change into casual clothes. And then we'll pop down to A&E. And that's, because that's the way I don't, unless I need to stress about stuff and really, if there's something terrible that has happened, really terrible, which hasn't thus far, then I will get very emotional about it, obviously. But I know my kids are going to be all right. They have people around them that love them. It doesn't always have to be me.
That's really good advice. I think the sort of guilt factor definitely diminishes as time goes on as well. When you think, hang on, I'm around them all the time, I'm really grumpy mummy, but they see me much less often, but they see, happy.
Well, yeah, and when dads are being interviewed,
go to work and have a nice hot coffee, and
dads in interviews are never ever asked, how do you cope with the dad guilt when you're at work? They never get asked that at all.
No, they don't.
It's like people want us to be guilty, and it's almost like it's a self-perpetuating whatever the word is, it's gone from my head, prophecy, isn't it? Is that you keep telling us that why do we feel guilty? So we are going to end up feeling guilty, because it's like, should we be feeling guilty? Oh, well, I should be feeling guilty. It's like, well, start asking dads the question and see what the answer is.
And on the subject of dads, there's a great point on this, that one of these mums on the chat has said that she's in charge of the class WhatsApp group, and she makes sure all the dads are on it, whether they like it or not. And it's, yeah, so Anna's clapping at that. So we're running out of time. I could carry on talking forever, but are there any, can we just go around and any kind of take home, if there's like one nugget of advice or a take home point that you want someone to remember, shout it out. Katherine.
I think it's not to worry whilst you're on maternity leave, because I think looking back, I probably spent far too much time worrying about what was going to happen going back to work, when actually it does just work itself out. So don't stress.
Victoria?
Oh, mine would probably be have confidence in yourself. And if you can't, if you go back and you're really struggling, don't go and ask for a demotion. You can do it. Just stick with it and ask for help where it's needed, but don't give up.
Charlene?
Don't feel guilty about loving the job that you do.
Brilliant.
Great one.
I'd say lower your standards. You don't have to be perfect, and this too shall pass. It's something that comes up on the Mumsnet boards again and again. They will sleep through the night. They will settle at childcare. Things will work out, and then when they do, try not to worry about the next thing.
Brilliant. Oh, great advice.